My name is Suzann Willhite. I consider myself a farm kid. I was born into a large farm family in southwestern Minnesota, and I'm the youngest of 14 surviving children. I say that because my mother had 17 children and three died. Um, there were also several miscarriages, but those were never spoken about. My dad did not get the family farm, so that meant he had to buy land or rent land, and that was a challenge. So inevitably we moved, but mostly we stayed near the small town of Walnut Grove, which most people know from Laura Ingalls Wilder and On the Banks of Plum Creek. And actually, my parents and three of my child's siblings are buried in the cemetery on the hill above Plum Creek. So I have this affinity for Walnut Grove and those stories which we all read, all of them growing up. My mother would read with us at night. Growing up, my mother was Danish German, my father was German. There were set things, the way things men did outside work and women did outside work. But once you came inside, it was all women's work. And so women would cook, men would eat first, and then women would clean up. And it wasn't until one of my older sisters said, "Wait a minute, we've cooked all this meal. We should all eat together. And Mom, why don't you eat first?" My mother was like, duh. She was so shocked. Like, you always feed the men first, even though you've been out baling hay or, walking beans or whatever. It was very unequal in terms of the work because women did both work and then men did no work in the house. So I saw that and I realized, I don't like that picture. We should all be able to, help out where we can. But I was the first person in my family to work my way through to a bachelor's and a master's degree from college. I have another sister who eventually finished her nursing degree, but she was much older, married, had children, but she finished. But that's two of us who've graduated from college um, out of a big family because it just wasn't the norm. It wasn't expected. It was expected that we would work. You work hard, you get ahead. Well, I wasn't seeing that. I wasn't seeing that for my older siblings. So I looked at them and I said, I want to do it differently. I wanted something in natural resources. I still enjoyed working with the land, but I didn't want to be dependent on weather. I know that I also benefited from affirmative action. As a woman coming into a male dominated field, there was requirements by the government to hire affirmatively. Um, and mainly that was for white women. We really benefited. They're still trying to get more persons of color, but that's a hard thing, even with affirmative action. I had experience when I was in college, and I realized that I was attracted to women. But I was in Denmark at the time. It was my sophomore year. I was overseas, and I thought, well, this is a hard life, and I don't necessarily want to live this life coming back to Minnesota. But meanwhile, one of my sisters had told my family that she thought I was a lesbian. So I came home to a lot of questions. And actually, my nephew told me, he said, Grandpa's blaming Grandma for you being a lesbian. And I thought, oh, I guess I have to deal with this. So I talked to my mom and I said, Mom, I have feelings for women. I think I may be attracted to women. Um, it seems that's been a good fit for me, but I am not sure. So I just wanted you to know, and it's not your fault. And she said, well, as long as you're happy. And I said, Mom, that's great because, so many people in relationships are not happy. And for her, a fundamental thing was, are you happy? Versus how does it look or what are people going to say? That was the first thing she said is, are you happy? As long as you're happy. I think that was the best, reassurance I could get from my mom. It's more about happiness than about what should be or what other people think. Now, I didn't ever talk to my dad about it because that was just one area that I figured we are not going to agree. And so we never did talk about it. So, one of my big issues that I care about, and you can see them right behind me, is the Equal Rights Amendment, the ERA. And I've been very passionate about this since I think 2016. Um, with the Trump election, I needed somewhere to put my energy. I got involved um, with being involved with the Women's March here in Minnesota. But I also wanted to do some fundamental how do we change this and opportunities for women. And actually, the Equal Rights Amendment is equality for all persons. It doesn't say women, it says on the basis of sex. So this would actually be a legal foundation for equality for all persons in the United States. And it is so close to being added as the 28th Amendment to our US Constitution that we're hopeful it will happen in the next year with Biden Harris. But it has been in the works for over 100 years. I mean, I've got Susan B. Anthony here. She advocated for the right to vote and she never was able to legally vote. It took so long, and it's taken so long because the Equal Rights Amendment was introduced in 1972. And so here we are in 2021, still advocating for this. And I'm hopeful that we can get this passed. But I also want to see this in our Minnesota Constitution because 26 other states did put it in their state constitutions, and that helps with their state laws. So, why do I care? Why do I care about equality or equal rights? Why did I come to that as my issue? Because there's so many issues. Um, I think I got it from my mom. I think the ERA means to me equality, it's equity. My mother was very compassionate. I think she was a true Christian. I don't know too many true Christians that actually live teachings of Jesus, but she was always compassionate and fair. And she was always willing to lend a hand, even when she didn't have much. She always planted a huge garden. We always had plenty of food, but we didn't always have things that money could buy. And sometimes she had to use food stamps. And I remember being a kid, being at the grocery store, and how some of the grocery owners would treat her. Now, some treat her well, others would make a big deal about making sure everybody knew my mom had food stamps, those little colored tickets you tore out of a book. And I knew just even as a child that he was demeaning. And I felt sorry for my mother, but I also realized that she didn't do that back. She didn't treat other people that way or put them in their place or make sure they knew um, what their limitations were. So I think I saw that and I understood you can have a big heart, you can be compassionate and fair. And that's what I want to see in the world. I just want a fair shot, equity of opportunity. Um, and that's, I think, what inspires me to do what I do. So, my relationship with my father was difficult because I was the youngest and he, um, he could be a nice human being, but he also had explosive anger and he sometimes beat my mother. And so, when that would happen, as we got older, us kids would say, "Well, you go in." We'd be on the side. We'd hear, whether she was getting hit or found a big gob of her hair once, and so I didn't have much respect for him because I knew that was wrong. You don't hit and beat people. You don't abuse people. He wasn't a drinker, so that wasn't the problem. It was that he had anger and blame, and he would take that out on others. And that would be my mom. So we tried to protect her as we got older, um, but she I asked her once if she loved him, And she said, "Well, I must have. I married him." And I said, "Well, Mom, that's not exactly the same thing." But I think she did love him. He was a good farmer. He knew good soils. He could grow crops. He was not a good businessman. If he could have shared that responsibility with my mother, who was a good financial person, she liked keeping the books, but he wouldn't. He liked to be in charge. And so I didn't respect my father because he couldn't let go of things he wasn't good at, and he blamed others for his choices in life. So there were some good things about him. He's the one who used to take us out for a drive or a picnic. My mom would do all the work to get the food ready, but he would at least initiate those fun times. But I think um, overall, I wish he could have been more loving and understanding and less dominating in the family. I think it's interesting to try to highlight ordinary people doing ordinary things, or what I think are ordinary things. I do think that so many people are disengaged with politics, frustrated, don't vote, don't think it matters, that I think these are ordinary people who can have impact in their little piece of the world, their vote, showing up at a council meeting, whatever it might be. But a lot of them don't because they don't believe that change is possible. They've given up. And I think that's a challenge when we're a democracy because we need people to be engaged. We need people to be educated about the issues, both sides, and be able to understand compromises and be able to move forward. And I think that to me is a challenge going forward is, in our communications, in our media, in our education. But I think the main thing for me now for is showing up, advocating, trying to make positive social change, make a difference for ordinary people, that they can be treated equal and have equity and opportunities. So if somebody asked me, well, how I'd like to be remembered, I actually don't need to be remembered. I don't care if I'm in a history book or written down somewhere. I want to do what I can, but I don't need to be acknowledged in any way. And I actually thought of a John Wesley uh, quote that said, "Do all the good you can, be all the means you can, in all the ways you can, in all the places you can, at all times you can, to all the people you can, as long as ever you can." And I think that's more my motto is do what I can with what I have in the short. And that's what I hope to do with my one wild and precious life.